They said I wasn't on the list. Not for the speech, not for the slideshow, not for the reserved pews up front where my brothers sat, legs spread like they'd inherited command from birth. They didn't even have to say it out loud. I saw it in the way Aunt Marla glanced past me as if searching for someone more worthy to greet. I saw it in the printed program Sons of the late Captain Thomas Riley. USMC bolded in navy ink. 3 names. Not mine. But I was his daughter. 2. I sat 2 rows from the back, my dress uniform stiff against my spine, brass collar pin burning cold into my neck. I had the same medals my father once wore. One of them was heavier than all his combined. I wasn't here for recognition, though. I'd buried that need in the desert 6 years ago, when the comms went silent and I held the last encrypted message in my hand like it was a prayer. No. I was here because it was my father's final honors ceremony, and whether or not my name was listed, I had every right to witness it. On the drive there, the fog along the highway looked like breath held in the lungs of ghosts. I had rehearsed what I'd say if someone stopped me at the gate. Colonel Riley, Department of Defense. No embellishment, just facts. Facts that carried weight if they chose to see them. But the worst part of returning isn't the confrontation, it's the pretending. The way your own blood pretends you're a stranger. The way a cousin squints at your name tag, then says, "Oh wow, you actually stayed in the service like it was some quaint hobby." And the way your sister, the same one who once begged you to cover for her teenage mistakes, now introduces you with a hollow, "This is my sister. She's in defense or something. Defense or something." I've walked into secure rooms under levels of clearance that would make most people's heads spin. I've commanded surveillance teams so deep underground the sun forgot our names. I've handed over decisions with life and death outcomes without flinching. But somehow, I'm still the daughter who wasn't invited to speak at her own father's funeral. The military taught me many things: how to disassemble silence, how to move without being seen, how to carry secrets like steel under skin. But nothing prepares you for family silence, the kind that's louder than war. The kind that paints your absence in every polite smile and every empty gesture. The kind that forces you to ask yourself, "Banjam bao gyo jung truak mot kan, kong ma chin mao mu kwa min kong mo." I parked 6 minutes before the ceremony. A black sedan 2 spaces down had a Marine Corps sticker. Probably my brother Michael. His uniform jacket was pristine, barely creased. He'd left the Corps after 2 years and a paperwork injury. But now he stood at the front, chin raised like the honor was his to inherit. Inside, the auditorium echoed with folding chairs and careful whispers. The stage was framed by the American flag, a crisp tri-folded one waiting on a velvet pillow. I recognized General Halstead from across the room, a man I'd once briefed during a tense NATO operation. He looked older now, more solemn. His eyes swept the crowd and landed briefly on me, a flicker of recognition. Then he turned away. No one stood when I entered. No one offered a seat. I didn't expect them to. I found a place near the aisle, not in front, not in back, just close enough to hear every word, just far enough to not be seen. The chaplain began. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of Thomas Riley's years in the Pacific, and his unshakable belief in honor. My chest didn't rise or fall. I had heard better speeches under worse circumstances, but when they called up the family, only my brothers stood. They approached the podium in practiced steps, 2 of them in suits, one in a dress uniform a half size too large. They spoke of fishing trips, of little league games, of how Dad taught them to drive, to tie a tie, to stand up for what was right. No one mentioned the daughter who helped coordinate the extraction of a fallen platoon under blackout conditions. No one mentioned the letter Dad wrote me in Kabul, the one where he finally said he was proud. It was never read. My mother sat front row, her handkerchief dabbed at dry eyes, I couldn't read her face. Not grief, not pride, something in between. Maybe she was still ashamed I outranked them all. Maybe she didn't know how to love a daughter who wasn't soft. They say women don't belong in the line of fire, but they forget silence is a battlefield, too. And I've been waging war in it all my life, when the moment came to present the flag. General Halstead stood. He took it gently from the aide and began his approach. Everyone expected him to walk toward my brothers. All eyes turned in their direction. But he turned the other way. He walked down the center aisle, toward me. Every breath in the room stopped. He halted in front of me. "Colonel Riley," he said, not loud, but firm. "Your father once told me the real legacy of a soldier isn't in what he earns, but in who he raises." And then he saluted. In full view of the academy, the officers, the family who thought I was invisible, the general of the command saluted me. My hands moved before my heart caught up. I stood, returned the salute. The weight of the room shifted like tectonic plates. Nothing loud, just everything different. My mother's hand fell from her lap. Michael's mouth opened, but no sound came. And me, I didn't blink. You know that feeling when the very thing they tried to bury becomes the root of their silence. That was the moment I knew I'd already won. The silence didn't end when the general sat down. It just changed shape, like the stunned hush before a storm decides which direction to turn or whether it should turn at all. I remained standing a moment longer than needed. Just enough. Long enough for the burn of stairs to settle into skin. I heard someone shift behind me, a cough 2 rows back, a chair creak under a too fast movement. All those little civilian sounds that meant they were processing something they hadn't expected. That they were trying to refile me under a category that had never been created. And I let them. I sat down slowly, smoothing the edge of my uniform across my knees. My pulse was steady, my breath controlled, but I felt the quake ripple under my ribs, not weakness, not nerves, something older, something cellular, that ache of the little girl I once was, sitting on the stairs during Dad's promotion party, listening to my uncles say, "Too bad he didn't have a son first, someone to carry the name." Well, now the name stood and saluted me. I didn't turn to look at my brothers. I didn't need to. I already knew what I'd see, that rigid discomfort of men suddenly unsure whether to clap, to stand, to pretend this hadn't just cracked the spine of the script they'd rehearsed. "You ever felt that kai koan kachki honhanra, min kong chonla, trungtam nua?" The chaplain continued. Something about legacy, duty. It passed through me like wind through the mountains, heard but unmoved. The next name read was one of my father's old unit friends, Colonel Jameson, retired. He shuffled up slowly, eyes wet, voice like gravel and loyalty. He spoke about war, about how my father had saved lives with words more than weapons. And then he said something I never expected. He looked straight at me and said, "And I remember when Tom got the letter, you know the one, from Kabul." I froze. He went on, voice clearer now. He'd just come back from the VA. His knees were acting up again. He was tired. But that letter, when he read your words, he stood taller, said to me, "My girl's a ghost in the field. They never see her coming, and they never forget her after." Gasps didn't echo, but they existed, micro-reactions. Aunt Marla's hand paused mid-fan. Someone near the front blinked too slow. And my mother. Her spine stiffened just enough to betray the years she'd pretended that letter never came. They all knew about it, and chose to bury it. Now it was exhumed, publicly, by one of Dad's most respected comrades. Jameson turned back toward the flag. We raise soldiers, but if we're lucky, we raise shadows that move with precision and honor, I didn't smile, but something in me exhaled a release not of triumph, but of truth finally allowed to breathe. The ceremony ended with the national anthem. I sang it under my breath. Old habit, my mouth forming every word, even as my mind walked elsewhere through briefing rooms, through midnight missions, through the echo of my father's voice in that last handwritten letter he signed my daughter, my equal, my better. No one clapped when it ended. Just the shuffling of feet and heels on tile, the strange buzzing of small talk trying to find its footing in a room that had just been stripped of its assumptions. People began to approach the family line, a row of grief and expectation. Michael stood in the center, taking hands like a politician. My mother flanked him, practiced and composed. Patrick and Daniel hovered like backup singers, ready to smile or nod when needed. And I stood back. I had no place in the tableau they'd staged until someone crossed the line. A young cadet, maybe 22, clean-cut, nervous. He approached me with hesitance and awe stitched into every movement. Colonel Riley, I turned. I just wanted to say, "Ma'am, it's an honor." He held out his hand, trembling slightly. I shook it, firm, grounded. "Thank you, Lieutenant," I said. "What's your division signal intelligence? Just finished basic. Then keep your ears open. Not just for enemy chatter, for silence. It'll teach you more than words ever will." His eyes widened. He nodded once, twice, like my presence had rewired something in him. When he left, 2 more followed, then 4. They didn't go to my brothers. They came to me, and the family noticed. I saw the twitch in Michael's jaw, the way Patrick stopped mid-sentence with a naval officer to glance over. My mother's hands gripped her clutch tighter. You ever see power shift like that? Not with shouting, not with argument. Just gravity moving from one body to another. That's what it felt like. And still, I didn't approach them. Not until the very end. The auditorium had thinned. Only a few clusters remained. I waited until the main line of condolences had dwindled, then walked toward the front, not to be seen, not to claim space, but because I had something to say. To him, my father. The flag lay folded, still untouched on its pillow. I knelt beside it, fingers brushing the edge. My metals chimed lightly from my chest. "Hey, Dad," I whispered. "Looks like I showed up anyway." Silence answered, but not empty silence. Full, heavy, sacred. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a small pin one he gave me after my first deployment. Just a silver star. No inscription. Just his initials carved faintly on the back. I placed it beside the flag. Not for the others to see. Just for him. "I didn't need a seat at the front," I said, voice low. "I brought my own legacy." Behind me, footsteps. I didn't turn, but the air told me it was my mother. Her perfume, lilac and judgment. She stopped beside me, didn't speak. I stood. Slowly, we faced each other. The same height, same eyes, different worlds. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Not ready. Maybe never. I looked at her once, not with pleading, not with anger, just recognition. "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "I already know what silence means in this family." And then I turned, walked past the pews, past the echoes, past the places they thought I would stay in, outside. The sun hit the metals on my chest like firelight. People still watched. I felt it, that shift. From shadow to presence. From invisible to inevitable. "Do you understand kai khoan kachki ban kong kan buok len san khao? Boy vika kan fong jan soai ve fiaban." I didn't win by forcing them to see me. I won by becoming someone they couldn't ignore. The air outside the auditorium tasted different, sharper, not quite fresh, more like cleared, as if the room I'd just left had held its breath for too long, suffocating in unspoken hierarchies. And now the wind finally dared to breathe again. I stood still for a moment on the stone steps, eyes narrowing against the sunlight as it spilled across the campus quad. The flagpole stood tall in the center, its rope tapping rhythmically in the breeze, a steady, patient sound, familiar, like a code sent to those who knew how to listen. I didn't rush. Let them catch up if they wanted. Let them stay behind if they didn't. I could still feel the weight of my mother's almost words pressing on the back of my neck. That instinct to turn around, to offer a path for her to walk toward me, it flared briefly. But I didn't move. Some bridges aren't crossed because they're blocked, others because we finally realize we're the only ones who ever planned to build them. Across the lawn, near the statue of the Academy's founder, a cluster of young cadets had gathered. I recognized their formation, casual but structured, like they were waiting for orders they pretended not to want. One of them, the signal intelligence kid, raised his hand in a faint wave. I acknowledged him with a nod. No need for speeches. They'd seen enough. My phone buzzed in my jacket. Unfamiliar number. DC area code. I hesitated, protocol demanded I check it. But something in me resisted. Today wasn't for orders. Not those kinds. Instead, I walked across the campus lawn, each step an unraveling not of identity, but of expectation. No longer was I bound to perform for their comfort. Not the families, not the institutions. I walked as I was, as I had always been. And still, part of me remembered. How many times had I stood in the kitchen as a teenager, pouring coffee for my father and brothers, while they discussed war strategy like I didn't have ears? How often did I sit on the porch alone, while they tossed the football, calling me too bookish, too delicate, too serious, too much of what they didn't understand, too little of what they could control. That's what they really hated, not who I was, but that I couldn't be edited, not even by them. I reached the edge of the quad and stopped beside a low concrete bench, sat, let the wind push through my hair, now neatly pinned beneath the officer's cap. I unbuttoned the top clasp of my uniform, not to relax, just to breathe. I remember once back in Kandahar we lost a drone feed mid-operation. 3 hours of black silence while a team moved through contested territory. I was the one they called to reroute the backup feed. While the officers shouted, I listened, and I found the leak. That's always been my gift. I don't raise my voice. I reroute the entire system. And yet, back home, they still thought I was the quiet one. You know that feeling ki ban man jen, much ho fai gia vo rang ban kong ton tai. A shadow crossed the edge of my bench. I looked up. Michael. His uniform blazer now wrinkled, tie slightly askew. Probably pulled at it once the room emptied the weight of pretending respectability no longer sustainable. He didn't sit, didn't smile. Hey, he said. I waited. Let the silence hang. Make him earn his own discomfort. He cleared his throat. Didn't know. General Halstead would do that. Neither did I. I replied. A pause. You still talk to him? I looked up, studying his face. That same chiseled jawline that once earned him admiration in every family photo. That same expression now slightly wilted not by age, but by confrontation with a truth he couldn't package. I've briefed him 3 times this year, I said. Last time was before he flew to Brussels. Michael blinked. Brussels? Yeah. NATO summit. Cybersecurity. I ran the black cell simulation. He opened his mouth, then closed it. And I saw it. That exact moment where his entire understanding of me, of rank, of worth, shattered. I didn't explain further. Let him do the math. He shifted his weight. Mom didn't know where to seat you. She thought, you might not come, because she didn't invite me. He looked down. You're right, I waited, but she thought you'd make it difficult. You know, ask for a speech slot. Want attention? I laughed. Soft. Just once. I don't need a microphone to be heard. Michael. He winced. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. You've always had this way of doing everything alone. I tilted my head. Maybe because no one ever walked beside me. That landed. I saw it in the way his shoulders dropped half an inch. No defense. No retort. He looked around. They keep asking me questions I don't know how to answer. About your rank, your deployments, the general. You could just tell them the truth. I don't know the truth. He said quietly. That's the problem. And for the first time in years, I saw it, the vulnerability. Not performance, not masculine posturing, but the aching realization that he never asked, never thought to. He sat down beside me. No words, just the long, slow weight of reckoning. I let the silence stretch again. Finally, he asked, do you still have that letter? My father's? I nodded. Yeah, framed, but it's in my quarters. I never saw it. He said, of course not. Another pause. Could I? Ever I considered it. One day, when it won't be a trophy, just a memory. He nodded. And then we sat there, two siblings trained by different wars, one born into medals, the other forged in their absence. And now somewhere in between a fragile truce. You ever feel that? Not forgiveness, not even closure, just the quiet shock of being seen. Maybe for the first time we watched the flag ripple high above us. He stood to go, then turned back. Colonel Riley, he said, not sarcastically. You did good. I always did. I said. He didn't argue. He just walked away, and I sat with the wind in my chest. The weight lifted. No parade, no apology, but finally no pretending. It's strange how stillness can be louder than applause. I remained on that bench for a long time, long after Michael walked away, and the echo of his words had thinned into the wind. You did good. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't remorse, but it was something. A fracture in the wall they'd built between me and the name they believed they owned. A single hairline crack letting daylight in, behind me. The campus began to return to its rhythm, the shuffle of cadets in pressed uniforms, the click of regulation boots, the sharp whistle of some distant command. Order, discipline, performance, all the familiar choreography. But I wasn't here for the academy anymore. I wasn't a product of this place. I was the anomaly they couldn't classify, the outlier they tried to forget, now standing too tall to ignore. I stood, my knees stiff from sitting still too long. I let my gaze sweep across the grounds once more, the white pillars, the perfectly trimmed hedges, the flags fluttering against a too-blue sky. This place had shaped me once, but it no longer held me. Walking toward the parking lot, I passed a line of cadets standing in formation. Young, rigid, still caught between admiration and fear. One of them, a woman, dark braid tucked neatly, eyes forward, let her gaze flicker as I approached. Just once, then snapped it forward again. She didn't need to speak. That look was enough. I paused, leaned in slightly, and whispered so only she could hear. You don't have to wait for them to see you. Move like they already do. Her jaw tightened. A breath hitched. I kept walking. The SUV sat waiting where I left it, still warmed by the sun. I tossed my cap into the passenger seat and sat for a moment before turning the key. Not to delay, just to absorb. My reflection in the side mirror caught me the gleam of polished metals across my chest, the sharp silhouette of rank on my shoulders. It used to feel like armor. Now, it felt like truth. You ever reach that moment where you realize you no longer have anything to prove, that no amount of explanation or validation or invitation would make the past less cruel, but that somehow, you made it wholly anyway? As the engine hummed to life, my phone lit up again. Same DC number. This time, I answered. Colonel Riley. I said. A pause. Then, ma'am, this is Deputy Director Singh, Office of Strategic Operations. I know it's an off day, but we have a situation that may require someone of your specific profile. I smiled slightly. The universe, always knowing how to call me home. Understood. I said, send the brief. The call ended. Just like that. No hesitation. No deliberation. My life, always poised to pivot back into the dark corridors of defense and strategy, while the world outside kept trying to fit me into dinner invitations and family trees that never made space for who I truly became. I pulled out of the lot slowly, coasting past the old red brick chapel and the towering statue of Valor at the front gate. A tour group passed by civilian teens with notebooks and wide eyes, led by a peppy mid-ranking officer. Their guide pointed at the various buildings, listing names and achievements. None of them said mine, but that didn't matter anymore, because history doesn't always announce its corrections. Sometimes it just waits. Waits for the moment a forgotten name makes the whole room pause. Waits for a daughter dressed in brass to rise while her brothers sit. Waits for a mother's silence to betray the shame she pretended wasn't hers. Waits for an entire narrative sculpted by omission to collapse under the weight of a single, undeniable presence. That's what power is. Not volume, not permission, but presence. Halfway down the road, I slowed at a red light. Outside, a man crossed the street with his child in tow. Little girl, maybe 8. She wore a toy soldier's cap tilted sideways, plastic dog tags clinking against her chest. Her father smiled down at her, and I watched as she saluted him. Sloppy, exaggerated, but proud. And for a moment, I was that girl again. But only for a moment. She didn't need to become me, but she needed to know she could. The light turned green. Back on the highway. The signs flicked past exit names I knew from old drills and new briefings, all coded in my memory, all part of the quiet path women like me walk uncelebrated, unthanked, but essential. You ever feel it? That double life, where one version of you disappears behind kitchen tables and forced smiles, while the other commands missions that decide nations. I've carried that duality for years, and I've mastered the silence between them. I arrived back at my quarters past sundown. The hallway lights were low, my boots echoing softly against concrete floors. My door opened to the familiar scent of leather and iron, the ritualistic cleanliness of someone trained to control even chaos. I hung the uniform carefully, each piece, each pin, each medal. I ran my fingers down the seam of the jacket one last time before stepping back. The room was quiet, but not empty. On the shelf above my desk sat the letter, Dad's, the one they all pretended didn't exist, still sealed in its original envelope. I'd never opened the original again after reading it in Kabul. Just carried a copy in my digital logs. But tonight, something pulled me toward it. I opened the flap slowly. The paper, creased and worn, still smelled faintly of his cologne, that old military-issue aftershave he never abandoned. Riley, it began. If you're reading this, it means you're alive. And I need you to know something I never said loud enough when it mattered. You were never the disappointment. You were the definition of what I tried to be. You surpassed me. They won't understand. Hell, even I didn't, for too long. But your silence, your strategy, the way you command without noise, that's the kind of power most men only pretend to carry. I hope the world salutes you one day, but if it doesn't, I will. I folded it back carefully, and for the first time in years, I let a single tear fall, not for the pain, but for the peace. There is no revenge sweeter than becoming undeniable. There is no closure more complete than not needing them anymore. You know that, don't you? That at the end of every war there's a moment where you stand alone, not as a survivor, but as proof that they were wrong. And sometimes, that's the only salute you'll ever need. The next morning, the knock came early. 3 precise taps. Not impatient, not tentative. Military, but not aggressive. I knew before I opened the door it wasn't family. I pulled on a plain gray tee, still damp from the shower, and opened it. Deputy Director Singh stood in the hallway. Not a phone call, not a courier. Him in person. He nodded once. Colonel, Director. I replied, stepping aside. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Just entered the room and stood facing the window, arms behind his back. The posture of someone who lived in systems most people never saw. We need you in Berlin, he said. 12 hours. I didn't ask why. He knew I didn't need the details until we were airborne, but he offered them anyway. A blackout during NATO transfer. Intelligence breach confirmed. Signals routing through civilian systems. Look surgical. They're calling it an accident. I don't believe in accidents. I nodded. Coordinates on your secure drive. Your team's already mobilizing. You'll brief them en route. This wasn't the first time Singh had come to me when the standard playbook failed. He had a pattern reach out at the 11th hour, trust me to read between the silences, then disappear into the folds of classified memory. But this time, there was something different in his eyes. Less control, more weight. He turned, finally meeting my gaze. There's chatter on the Eastern Network, not just about NATO. He paused. About you. I stayed still. Let that land without reaction. He continued. They're not just watching us anymore. They're studying names, patterns, command signatures, and your pattern showed up in 2 cross-referenced breaches. A beat. I asked. How compromised we don't know. Yet. But whoever they are, they're tracking silent players, people without press, without obvious footprints. People like you. I moved toward my cabinet, already pulling gear field-grade comms, data encryptors, biometric locks. Who else knows? Singh's jaw tensed. Only me? For now. That said more than anything else. It meant my own agency couldn't be trusted with this. I zipped the tactical duffel shut and turned toward him. I'll go dark after touchdown. No signals until I confirm base-level integrity. He nodded once. Then, softer. Yesterday, I saw the footage. I froze. The ceremony. He added. The salute. Halstead doesn't stand for many. I held his gaze. He stood for my father. No, Singh said. He stood because of you. Something in his voice cracked slightly. A human edge that didn't belong in a man like him. And for a second, I wondered if he knew more about the breaches than he admitted. If this wasn't just about data, if it was about legacy. He left without shaking my hand. That was his way. I stood alone again, room emptied of the present, filled only with the weight of what I was about to carry. My uniform hung untouched on the door, but I wouldn't wear it today. In this job, anonymity was more powerful than rank. I changed into civilian black, tied my hair into a low knot, pocketed the letter from my father, not for nostalgia, for clarity. Because there are missions that require more than intelligence, they demand memory, memory of who you are when the world forgets. 2 hours later, I was on the tarmac. The jet was small, silent, marked with no symbols. Inside, 2 agents I didn't recognize sat strapped in, already their eyes tracking me without comment. Good. That meant they'd been briefed not on my title, but on my function. That's how I preferred it. A man handed me a tablet mid-boarding. Encrypted. Single access. I read the mission file in silence as the plane lifted. Confirmed breach at a known NATO pipeline, but deeper than protocol suggested. Route-level access rerouted through a civilian relay once used by a now-defunct intelligence cell. A cell I'd once dismantled. And there it was. My signature. Buried in the algorithm, it wasn't just about the breach. It was personal. Someone was reconstructing my moves, not to copy, to predict. Do you know what that feels like? Kiko ke lan theo chin tung buak jivo hin ma bantung taura. Vadung non huvuki. The worst enemy is not the one who threatens. It's the one who understands. I memorized the code map, wiped the drive, and returned the tablet without a word. By the time we landed in Berlin, the sun had already dipped behind the clouds, casting the runway in washed-out blue and silver. A car waited black, unmarked. Inside sat Commander Frey, NATO Cyber Ops liaison. He didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. Finally, they want a public answer, but they know it's not a public threat. Of course not. I replied. He looked at me then. Why you? That wasn't curiosity. It was fear. They're not after data. I said. They're after patterns, memory, behavioral code. I'm not the leak. I'm the bait. He didn't speak again. Inside the Berlin Command Center, I walked corridors that felt eerily familiar. Not because I'd been there before, because I'd dreamed them, planned their defense in hundreds of simulations, predicted their failure points. And now, here I was watching one play out. I gave orders fast. No time for protocol. Shut down surface monitoring. Isolate the relay. Reroute command to sandbox systems. Then, I did what only I could do. I built a countersignature, my own trail. Inverted. A digital trap written in the same rhythm as my classified actions, but encoded with a virus that would flag anyone who tried to mimic it. Hours passed. No food. No breaks. Just silence and the tap of keys. At 02:37 Berlin time, the breach pinged again, right where I left it open. And then, the virus triggered. IP located. Source. Not Russian, not Chinese, domestic. I stared at the string of code, read it twice, and then my stomach turned cold. The access signature matched someone from my own chain of command. Someone who had sat in the Pentagon briefing room the same day I received commendation from Defense Command. Someone who clapped, then went home and used the memory against me. I closed the system, locked it. Not for revenge, for protection. Because in this world, being excellent makes you visible, but being excellent and uncontrollable, that makes you dangerous. I leaned back in the steel chair, head tilted against the cold wall. You understand now, don't you? Why they left my name off the funeral program, why they never gave me the podium, why my silence scared them more than my presence. Because I was never one of them. I didn't rise to be seen. I rose so they couldn't erase me. And now, even their betrayal carried my echo. I stood, mission logged, breach sealed, identity reclaimed not from the enemy, but from the ones who thought I'd never return. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of adrenaline. I've lived in its shadow too long to be ruled by it. Not because of fear. Either fear left me back in Kandahar, in a shipping container full of maps and lies. No. What kept me awake in Berlin was something colder, sharper, familiar, recognition. They weren't trying to destroy me. That would be easy. They were trying to rewrite me, to take what I'd done in the dark, the unspeakable, unrecorded, uncelebrated victories, and feed it into their system, their story. To turn the methods I pioneered into tools they could assign. Rebrand. Weaponize without name or trace. Without credit. That's worse than betrayal. It's disappearance. You know what that feels like. Banbiet kam giach kiten minbik so akoy moidan sach. Jungkong. It isn't death. It's deletion. That morning, as Berlin slept behind frost-laced glass, I wrote the report. Every keystroke clean, precise, cold. Just enough truth to lock the breach. Just enough restraint to avoid igniting the war behind it. The enemy wasn't a nation. It was a committee. By Oro 700 I was in the air again. No debrief. No handshake. Just clearance codes and a silent escort to the jet. They didn't ask where I'd go next. Because they didn't need to know. I returned stateside under a different name. As I often did. The world saw one version of me, the polished officer with clean medals and calm eyes, but that's just one skin. The real version is quieter. Moves without echo. Operates without applause. That week, the Defense Department released a statement: unauthorized access detected, neutralized by joint NATO response, no data loss, no mention of me. Not surprising. That's how my name survives through omission. I went back to base, then home. The apartment was still sterile, almost Spartan by choice. One framed map on the wall, one letter tucked into the drawer. I let myself shower slowly, let the heat pull the chill from my shoulders, from my hands, from beneath my sternum. When I stepped out, the mirror caught me. Wet hair, clean skin, collarbone sharp from weeks of fieldwork. My eyes not tired, just older. Older than my brothers, even if they'd never admit it. I opened my closet and looked at the dress I hadn't worn in years. The one my mother once picked for my sister's engagement dinner. She said it would soften me. I kept it only as a relic, a reminder. I closed the closet. Some armor isn't fabric. It's the refusal to become what they expected. That weekend, the Academy sent a follow-up email. Colonel Riley, we would be honored to include your name in the updated digital program for Captain Riley's honor ceremony. We regret the earlier omission and thank you for your continued service. No apology. Just regret. I didn't reply. They had already seen enough. But something in me stirred, not bitterness. A quiet decision. I opened the leather-bound folder my father once gave me, the one with the pressed leaves from every base we'd lived on. Inside, between the maps and yellowed photographs, was my final copy of the after-action report, the one from the mission I never got credit for. Operation Silent Frame, still redacted in official archives, but mine, entirely mine. I slid it into a new envelope and addressed it to the Academy's War History Department. No return label. Just my initials on the seal. Let them wonder. Let them archive a legacy they can't claim. I mailed it the next day. Then, I drove. Not toward a base. Toward home. The old one. The one where Dad used to sit on the porch with his marine mug, reading the same dog-eared Hemingway novel each summer. The driveway was cluttered Daniel's car, Michael's truck, a sedan I didn't recognize, probably my mother's new caretaker. I parked at the end, deliberately. No need to be close. As I stepped out, my boots clicked against the gravel. That sound used to bother my mother. She said it was aggressive. Now, it announced me. Inside, the hallway smelled like polish and roses, fake ones, my mother's favorite scent, as artificial as her affection. She was in the sitting room, back straight, hair coiled in the same perfect style as always. She looked up and blinked once. You're early. You didn't invite me. Pause. Well, it's Daniel's promotion dinner. Then I'll stay for dessert. I didn't smile, didn't move. Behind her. A framed photo of my father, the one they enlarged for the ceremony, stared at me with that soft, amused restraint. The same look he wore when I corrected his coordinates at age 11. Coffee, she offered, reluctantly. No. We stood in silence. Then she spoke. Your brother's making captain? Navy. But still. I know. You read the program. I read the silence. Her lips tightened. But for once, she didn't dismiss it. I looked around. You changed the drapes. Too many memories. And just like that, she admitted it without saying it. Dad's absence haunted her more than she let on. I stepped forward, opened the drawer beneath the TV cabinet. It was where he kept the letters. There, folded neatly between utility bills and brochures, was mine, unopened, still unread. She turned away. I couldn't. I didn't know what to do with it. You do now. I placed it gently on the table beside her, then took out a second envelope, smaller, lighter. My resignation, I said, from needing to be understood. She looked at it, unsure if it was sarcasm or confession. It's not a performance. Mother, I added. I just wanted you to see I don't need your permission anymore. A shift in her eyes. Grief. Maybe. Maybe not. Behind me, Daniel entered, voice loud. Whoa, didn't know you were coming. I turned. I didn't come for you. Michael followed. She's probably here to inspect the place. I didn't bite. Instead, I pulled something from my bag, a small case, black velvet, laid it on the table, opened it. Inside the metal from Operation Silent Frame, top clearance, never awarded in public. Only 3 recipients, their names buried. But mine still shined. I closed the case, turned to them. You don't have to say anything, I said. I brought the truth with me. Daniel stared. Michael looked away. My mother, still silent. That was enough. I walked toward the door, not storming, not fleeing, just finished. And as I reached for the handle, I heard it. Soft, like breath against memory. I kept the letter. My mother whispered, even if I couldn't read it. I turned my head slightly. Just enough. I kept writing, even when I knew you wouldn't. And then I left. Outside. The evening air was sharp again, clean, with something like closure, but not quite. Not final. Just mine. The air bit at my cheeks as I stepped outside. The sky hovering in that bluish limbo before dusk, where the world hasn't yet committed to darkness but no longer belongs to light. I didn't look back at the house. Didn't need to. I could feel it behind me, that museum of denial, of glass-framed memories where I was always cropped out. Let them keep it. Let them polish the lies and set out matching silverware. My presence had already unsettled their order. No argument necessary, no explosion required, just the undeniable weight of who I'd become. You ever realize that power doesn't come from being heard, but from being impossible to erase? I walked slowly to my car. Every step was deliberate, my boots pressing the gravel back into the earth like punctuation, final, grounded. It wasn't rage that moved through me, not anymore. That had burned itself out years ago. This was quieter, denser, like ash. The kind that settles after the fire has devoured everything it needs. I paused at the driver's door and looked up. Somewhere behind the rooftop. I knew my mother still sat in that parlor, surrounded by pictures of men she understood. My father in uniform, my brothers in graduation gowns, their frames all straight, smiling, symmetrical. I wondered if tonight she'd finally place a picture of me among them, or if she'd lock my medals away in a drawer, Pretend this visit never happened. Either way, it didn't matter. They didn't have to remember me. History already would. The engine hummed to life beneath my hand, a smooth, calibrated sound. Military issue, of course. Nothing in my life had ever been decorative. Everything had a function, even silence. Especially silence. I pulled onto the main road without turning on the radio. Just me, the pavement, and the dusk. Somewhere along the two-lane highway, the weight of Berlin returned to my shoulders. Not the mission that was over, but the realization they hadn't just tracked my code. They had studied me, which meant someone in the shadows still believed I was dangerous, not expendable, not forgotten, but a threat. It should have made me paranoid. Instead, it made me calm, because if they still watched, it meant I was still free. I drove until the sky turned black and the moon began tracing its pale hand across the dashboard. My phone buzzed once in the passenger seat, a secure notification. An anonymous Dropbox update. Someone had opened the Operation Silent Frame file at the academy. They didn't write back. They wouldn't. But they read it. And that was enough. I exited the highway and turned onto an old gravel road that led to the cabin. My father's. Once. Now mine. No one else ever came here. Not my family. Not my colleagues. Just me and the ghosts. It was the only place I could exist without splitting into layers. The tires crackled against the stones. I parked beneath the trees and stepped out. 1,000 cicadas hummed their private chorus in the forest around me. The door opened with the familiar creak. I didn't flip on the lights. I knew this darkness. I lit the fireplace, pulled off my boots, sat on the floor with my back against the couch. The flames cast flickering shadows across the metals on my chest. I unpinned them slowly, placing each one in the small wooden box beside the hearth. Not out of disrespect. Out of ritual. Out there, they meant authority. In here, they meant memory. I reached into my bag and pulled out the black envelope Singh had handed me before Berlin. I hadn't opened it then. Didn't need to. The mission didn't require it. Now. I unfolded it slowly. Inside a list of names. 3 of them were circled. 1 of them underlined twice. The man who clapped during my defense commendation. The one who tried to erase me digitally while praising me publicly. Typical. It always starts with applause. Then they reach for the delete key. I read the list once more. Then I burned it. Fed each page into the fire. One by one. Because I'm not a symbol. And I'm not a revenge story. I'm a consequence. You know that difference. A symbol waits to be saluted. A consequence walks into the room and changes its temperature. As the fire cracked, I leaned my head back and let my eyes close. No sleep. Just rest. Just breathing. Letting my muscles remember they belong to a body, not just a machine. I thought of the cadet again, the young woman I passed near the academy quad. The flicker of her eyes, the way she stood still, hoping I'd see her. She didn't need to be me, but she needed to know I existed, that someone like her had already survived the erasure, walked through the fire, and came out not softer, but sharper. Tomorrow, she'd rise early, run drills, learn codes, memorize tactics written by men who'd never seen real silence. But she'd remember my voice. Move like they already see you. And she would. Because that's what changes everything, not permission, but presence. At midnight, the wind picked up. I stood, poured myself a glass of cold water, and stepped outside. The forest stretched wide around me, ancient, watchful. The stars above glittered like encrypted messages no one could decode. I stood barefoot in the grass and whispered to no one. You tried to forget me. Then I smiled, just slightly, but I remembered myself. You know what that's like, don't you? When you become the story they tried to write without you. When you sit at their table. Not to ask for a seat, but to burn the whole blueprint and build your own. That's where I live now, not in their expectations, but in my execution. And as the wind pulled through the trees, the ashes of 100 erased names lifted into the night sky and mine rose with them. Not needing applause, not needing forgiveness, just existing. Loud in its silence, present in its absence, unshakable in its truth. By morning, the fire had gone out. All that remained was the scent of smoke clinging to my skin and the soft imprint of ashes cooling in the hearth. I stood barefoot on the wood-planked floor, staring at the box of medals by the stonework, not reaching for them, just observing, like artifacts, like they belonged to someone else. They were earned. Yes. But they were never the goal. That's the thing no one tells you about power. It isn't the medal. It's the silence that follows it. The shift in the room. The way people rearrange themselves when you walk in. The way old stories start changing slowly, awkwardly just to account for your existence. I didn't get dressed in uniform that morning. I wore black again. Cotton. Simple. Strong. I made coffee the way my father used to 2 scoops. One silence, one breath. Then I stepped outside with the mug and sat on the porch. The cabin overlooked the slope of a hill that dipped into fog-covered pine. No fences, no gates, just open terrain, untamed. I drank slowly, let the quiet press against me like armor. Then I heard its tires crunching the gravel. Not fast, not sneaky, not hostile, just inevitable. I rose, didn't hide, didn't reach for the pistol I kept behind the screen door. I already knew who it would be. The black government vehicle stopped at the bottom of the hill. Out stepped a man I recognized instantly, even if I hadn't seen him in 3 years. Brigadier General Matt Corwin, ex-colleague, ex-friend, still wearing that same impeccable watch that always ran 5 minutes ahead of schedule. He didn't approach quickly, just walked up the hill with the steady patience of someone who'd already rehearsed this conversation in his head. I waited at the porch. He reached the steps, nodded. "Colonel, General, you don't look surprised." "I'm not." He looked at the forest, then back at me. "Singh told me you burned the envelope." I said nothing. "Doesn't matter. You always remember the names anyway." Still silent. He sighed. "They're nervous. You know that." "Right. I've known that since Kandahar." A pause. He looked down at his boots, then back at me. "You weren't supposed to find the breach in Berlin. Then they shouldn't have used my code." I argued against it. "That's what you always say after." That landed. He swallowed hard, nodding once, accepting the blow. I stepped aside. "You want coffee?" He blinked, hesitated. Then, "Yeah, I think I do." We sat on the porch like we used to, before everything split, before promotions and security clearances and award ceremonies that pretended I didn't exist. He sipped once, then again. I read the report. He said, "Which one, silent frame?" "Of course." He set the mug down gently. "That mission wasn't supposed to happen." "I know. It wasn't even sanctioned by defense until you were already in motion." I met his eyes, and it saved lives. He nodded. "Thousands." Another pause. "But that's not why they're afraid of you?" I tilted my head. "Go on." He leaned forward. "They're afraid of the idea that you exist. A woman who doesn't ask, who doesn't bend, who writes strategy in blood and code and then disappears without asking for credit. They don't know how to use that." "Good," I said. He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth twitching like they used to when we sat in the war room at 3 a.m., trying to reroute satellites over hostile airspace. "They're going to offer you something?" he said. "A seat." I laughed once. "A seat at the next table. Joint command." "I'm not interested." "I didn't say you should be." "I said they're going to offer." Silence. Then, "You know what they're really asking, don't you?" He looked at me. "They want me visible now. After years of pretending I was too cold, too quiet, too outside the narrative, they want me on stage, so they can say, 'See, we made her. She's ours.' And you're not." "No." Another sip of coffee. A bird cut through the tree line. The sun finally broke over the edge of the hills, casting a beam across the floorboards between us. He leaned back. "So what do you want?" I looked at the forest, at the box of medals inside, at the road I'd built without their approval, and I said, "Nothing. Nothing. I don't want their table. I don't want their stage. I want their silence." "Why?" "Because when they stop speaking, the truth gets louder." He sat with that for a while, let it settle. Then, slowly, he stood. He reached into his coat and pulled out a file. Plain. No label. He didn't hand it to me. He placed it on the table beside my coffee mug. "For your eyes only," he said. "You'll understand when you read it." And then he turned, walked back down the hill without asking for anything in return. I watched until the black car disappeared around the bend. Only then did I reach for the file. Inside, a single document. A list. At the top, a new operation code name. Below my name, not redacted, not erased, appointed, in full. And at the bottom, a single line, handwritten. "We built the machine, but you rewrote the language." I closed the file, set it on the windowsill, didn't smile, didn't cry, just stood, breathing. Do you know what that feels like, to reclaim your story so fully that even your silence becomes an order they follow, to exist outside their permission, and yet reshape the landscape they thought they controlled? I stepped back into the cabin, opened the wooden box, pulled out one medal, just one, pinned it to my chest, not for them, not for display, but for the woman I used to be. The one who sat in the back row at her father's ceremony, unlisted, unacknowledged, and still unbreakable. I walked outside, faced the wind, and whispered to her. To all of us, I was never on their list, but I was on history's,